May 6th. Did my report, had my meeting, wrote my letter, and even found someone to take my letter out. For $1. And then had to stand guard between 2 and 3 o'clock a.m. Nothing unusual moving out there, except a thick, damp fog. After this, managed to close my eyes. For 10 minutes, I think. And then it was 5 o'clock and time to get up and get ready to greet the Rebs. K Company, who felt the hardest fighting yesterday, was replaced by reserves. C and A companies both asked to be left in place, and 3 other companies was moved up to add to their numbers. There are now over 200 blue uniforms positioned down in front of me, and many more around the clearing. There is a feeling among the officers that they might try to get around us here, and then move up our line of battle along the narrow path. Major Pettit relocated his guns, which was hard work in the tangled undergrowth, and 4 now stand near the middle of my little line. Had breakfast this morning to the sound of distant fighting. Fog has lifted some, and the lieutenant said it will burn off by 8, but that we should keep the men alert, since our friends over there might like to fight with it as cover. I know something is going to happen, because couriers have been flying up and down the path since 5:30 a.m., and the officers have had many meetings. Someone also thought it important that we receive a supply of ammunition, but no food, so we only have 1 day's rations left. Pete McQuaid joked that the guns probably don't think many of us will be needing to eat if the Reb forces are as persistent today as they were yesterday. McQuaid patted the shirt pocket that held the coin I'd given him and added, "But I'm not worried. Not a bit." This prompted a review of the lucky mini list, and it turns out that Willie Dodd is to have it today. Have visited my men many times already. Johnny is in very good spirits, despite not having lucky mini. He has made his position even snugger with additional piles of wood, and when I greeted him, he asked me how I liked Fort Henderson. I told him that I had sent my money to Sarah for safekeeping, and he said, "That is almost like a marriage proposal." Dark is dark. What time is it? No strength. Will try to write, but it is still dark, and tired. Head hurts, and tired. Where are my men? And the sergeant? And lieutenant? Can hardly see beyond this tree. With the dark. Or is it my eyes? Voices talking. Heard barking. Will check. Can feel pencil. Can feel myself writing. Must be alive. Voices all around. Dark still. And head is throbbing still. Knock I took not so serious. But everything is spinning. Must find a safe place away from here. Rebs moving everywhere. A voice is talking over and over in my head. The way of the wicked is like deep darkness. They do not know over what they stumble. Familiar voice. Uncles? Who is wicked? Foolish to be huddled here and writing. Where are the others? Later. Sun is just up, and I have stopped to rest my leg. Suppose it is May 7th, or maybe May 8th. I could have lost a day, I guess. Can see the woods better, but this doesn't tell me where I am. Head still hurts. There is a dull pounding behind my left eye, and the rest of my body is sore, especially my left shoulder and wrist. Hand numb, but nothing broken that I can tell, so I count myself lucky. A funny word for me to use. Someone coming. Another Red patrol. Squads of cavalry and companies have been going by since my eyes first opened after the explosion. Fighting far off, though where is hard to tell. I don't even know where I am exactly. Maybe a mile from where the fight was. Uncle's voice still making visits. No food, and need to close my eyes again. We'll write more later. Somewhere, sometime later. I have found a hollowed-out hole in the side of a hill with shrubs and saplings all around. A good snug place to fit my body. This seems a quiet enough spot, but the Rebs have men roaming about looking for us, so no place is safe for long. Will write what I can remember about yesterday's battle and then sleep. Must travel at night. Here is what I remember, but I may not recall it all. I was writing in this journal when a bugle sounded, and someone off in the woods to my left yelled, "Here they come! Here they come!" Lieutenant Toms and the other officers was instantly alert and issuing orders. Men started running here and there, and a scattering of musket fire erupted. The cannoneers all leaped into position, officers ready. Not more than a few moments had passed, and the fight was in full swing. I tucked the journal in my shirt, took up my musket, which I had loaded with dry powder earlier, and turned, ready to fire, when there was a succession of booms from across the way, answered immediately by a full volley from our cannons. Just the thought of the sound made by all the cannons, and the way the earth shook, makes my head throb even now. A second later, the ground all around began to erupt as shells hit and exploded, and dirt and debris began flying. A shell ripped into the breastworks and instantly killed Niles Rogers and injured Otto Parison. Good soldiers both. Another of my charges, Hudson Marsh, cried out, "I am killed! I am killed!" And I went over and saw that he had been hit in the shoulder and was bleeding some. "You're not dead yet," I yelled in his ear. "Get yourself back to the ambulances if you have to." But then he realized there was so much metal flying that it was safer to stay put. I wish my head was clearer. Even now, sitting here in my quiet nest, what happened is still murky. I know our cannons was firing as quickly as they could be loaded, so the ground was in constant motion, and dust was jumping up with one and then another and another boom. I heard Sergeant Donahue and Sergeant Drink shouting orders, and so I did the same, though what I said is lost to me. A shell hit one of the cannons on my line, and pieces of it, and the men around it, went flying. I remember thinking, "They have our range now," and seeing Lieutenant Toms moving among the men, his right arm dangling as if he'd been hit, with Caesar at his side holding him up. I saw men from C Company rushing forward, then almost immediately they was running back, along with some from A Company. A wagon rumbling toward the cannons with fresh ammunition hit the side of a tree and flipped onto its side. I heard 100 shouted orders, and the screams of the wounded, ours and theirs. I yelled to my group to be ready to cover our retreating soldiers. There was the sharp blast of bugle commands, and the guns, and of course, big and small, popping and booming everywhere. I was disoriented and confused. Must stop for a moment, to rest and let my thoughts calm down. Can't remember what happened next anyway. The voice, Uncle's I'm sure, is back. The shield of his mighty men is red, his soldiers are clothed in scarlet. The chariots flash like flame when mustered in array. The chargers prance. How many times did I copy these lines? How many times did Uncle read and mark my mistakes and make me copy them again? Later. I was sleeping peacefully with no dreams in my head at all, when suddenly I heard a voice shouting in my ear. A new voice. Corporal Gorham's. I woke up and blinked, looking around to see what the corporal wanted. But I was alone, of course, and still in my hole in the side of the hill. It is too late to travel, so I will write instead. The corporal's voice has helped me remember more. The battle was going on all around, and I was confused when suddenly Gorham was next to me yelling, "Sergeant, the lieutenant has been taken away injured, and Sergeant Donahue is hit too. He said to get you." I didn't respond to him at all. Instead, I looked to see if we had any reserves on the path to help out, but there was none. Then I counted my men to see how many of them was still there. Aside from Parison and Marsh, everyone was okay. "Sergeant," Corporal Gorham said, and that brought me back to full to the situation. "I am leaving you here in charge of these men, Corporal. Tell them to stay low and give our men out there good cover." I said, and then asked, "Where is Sergeant Drake? Is he okay?" "He is up the line and was fine when I left." "Good," I answered, because Sergeant Drake was second sergeant and would take over for Sergeant Donahue. I went to the clearing. Here it was a mess. Blasted holes in the breastworks, our dead and wounded, pieces of artillery here and there, shouting and cries of pain. Shelp was standing up, screaming at the top of his lungs, challenging the Rebs to come and get him and cussing at them. The rest of our men was shooting and reloading as quickly as they could and looking very grim. Sergeant Donahue was sitting with his back against the breastworks, shot through the bowels, holding his guts in his hands and bleeding badly. "Please," he said clearly but weakly, "they are going to get through unless we get help. Keep them, the men, keep them together. Pull them in, close to the guns, hear? Drake is—" He winced and looked down at his wound, then looked up at me with an odd little smile on his face. "Doesn't hurt but a little. Strange, very strange." He was already pale from lost blood, so I told him I would take care of everything, and then tried to convince him to go back to the ambulances. But he said no. "Do your work, Pease. Just do your work. Don't worry about me. I will be fine." I didn't have any idea what to do next, but I thought it couldn't hurt to order Shelp to get down and shoot at the Rebs. "You haven't killed one with your cussing, Charlie." He looked at me with about the same amount of hate he did the Rebs, growled something at me, but then he ducked down and started shooting. I ran past Shelp and up the line, looking for Sergeant Drake to tell him what had happened to Sergeant Donahue and Lieutenant Toms, and see if he had any other instructions for me. I probably should have sent another man and gone back to my position, but I was nervous about doing something wrong while waiting for an answer. I tossed my musket aside as too heavy. So there I was, a perfect running target for the Rebs, and that thought made me pick up my feet even quicker, I think. Another of our cannons was destroyed, and Major Pettit's horse was hit. It went down on its front knees, and the Major had to leap clear before it rolled over on him. "They are through on the left," I heard someone shout from up ahead of me. If that was true, it meant that we was cut off from the rest of the army and any possible help. We was an island surrounded by waves of angry butternut. I found Drake, who was already responding to Major Pettit's orders to relocate his guns. I relayed my information, but all I recall him saying was, "Good luck, Sergeant, and watch yourself." The Rebs was coming across the clearing, but their charge was irregular. Beyond Sergeant Drake's position, they had gotten very close to our breastworks. Where we was and below hadn't gotten halfway yet, but they still came on. I ran down along our line again, shouting, "Aim and shoot! Aim and shoot, fellows!" The men at the breastworks at the clearing seemed to have settled into a regular pattern of shooting, and then I realized we might need cartridges pretty quickly, so I had Sanford and Van Dyke, who had been hit in the hand, but not so bad, see how much ammunition the men really had. If they ran out, there would be nothing left to do but retreat. At the clearing, the men were down to 10 or 15 rounds each, so we didn't have much time. I sent Develia Stevens scampering to find ammunition. Next, I went back to where my men was and checked to see how much ammunition they had. 40 to 50 rounds each, I discovered. I also found that the forward lines had begun to fall back, and I assumed they was running short of ammunition. Just then I remembered something Sergeant Donahue had told me at Gettysburg, and I said to Asa Rich, "Go around to the dead and wounded and gather up their ammunition and give it out over at the clearing." After this, my recollection became somewhat of a swirl with a lot of blank spaces. I was told that Major Pettit was killed somewhere up the line, cut in half by a shell. His aides was barking out the orders in his place, but I was wondering when they would realize this spot was lost, because without a lot more ammunition and reserves, it was most certainly lost, and hoping they wouldn't wait so long that we couldn't get back out and back to the rest of the army, wherever it was. Of course, this was Major Pettit's group, and they didn't like to leave a fight. I also remember seeing the men in front still coming back to us. That's about when I noticed that one of the cannons on my line was short-handed, and I started toward it, thinking to help out. And then the earth around me opened up with a deafening roar. I felt myself lifted into the air and tumbling over and over. When I came down, everything went black and quiet for me, though I don't remember hitting the ground at all. This is all I remember of the fight. I guess I was knocked out by the explosion, or by landing on my head, and it was a while, hours maybe, before I am sure I heard a noise behind me. The rumble of cavalry, most likely. Far off, but clear enough to freeze my hand till the danger passed. Since I was ordered to keep a record of what happened, and since there is nothing else to do while I wait, I will continue my story where I stopped. After being tossed around by the explosion, it was a good deal of time before I became aware of anything. First came the horrible strangling braying of a wounded mule, calling and calling and calling. Then I heard the moans of the wounded and the sounds of fighting, far, far away, and nothing but a distant grumble. And barking. I heard barking and knew Spirit was near. My face was mashed into the ground, and when I blinked, my eyes opened, I found myself staring at leaves and twigs and clots of dirt. It was dark by this time, but I could see enough to know that the fight was over here. The ground had that chewed-up look, and there was some bodies near, just shapes, so I didn't know who they was. Then came the voices, real ones, so I stayed still and listened. Turned out to be a couple of Rebs searching the bodies for boots, food, and cartridges. They was whispering, which told me they was on the sneak and should be somewhere else, probably where the fighting was. I played dead as they went on, whispering and shopping. Spirit barked and barked, and then he set to growling. I wanted to look to see what was happening, but didn't. Next I heard a yelp, and I suppose one of the Rebs kicked Spirit. When they had found all that they needed, they drifted off, and the area around me was still, except for the groans of the wounded and the cries of that mule. This is when I moved my legs to see if they worked, and got my left arm out from under my body, though I moved slowly and quietly, in case other Rebs was near. I could hear cavalry going up the path, and some wagons, and assumed they was Rebs. But it was dark enough, and I was far enough away that if I was careful, I could slip away and avoid being taken prisoner. I rolled onto my side next and pushed myself into a kneeling position. My head and arm and chest was on fire with pain, but my legs seemed fine enough. I knew I could get clear as long as my legs held out. When I stood, I was so dizzy I swayed and had to lean against a tree for a while. This gave me a chance to glance all around. I could just see the clearing through the tree branches and bushes, not clearly, just a lighter patch of gray. And the breastworks, solid and straight in places, ripped up in others. And some bodies and twisted up pieces of artillery. One soldier was on his back, his arm frozen as it was reaching up. For what? Help? I didn't see any movement anywhere. The Moans was away from me, in the clearing mostly. I thought about going around to see who was injured and who was killed. Lieutenant Tom's wants a careful record of such. Then I thought better. The section was empty now, but it might take a while to find them, and the Rebs might be back any minute. And what could I do to help them? I didn't even have any water. I had to get away and do it while my legs had strength to carry me, and my brain still worked. But which way? The path was out of the question. Too busy with enemy patrols. Our army, if it still existed, was up toward Chancellorsville or thereabouts, but since the Rebs had broken through the line, that way would be swarming with them. So I had to go in the safest direction, which was across where the Rebs had been when the fight started, and deeper south into the woods. Before setting off, I looked up and down my line as quickly as I could. I thought about Johnny then, so I went, hobbled really, to where he had been. Fort Henderson was empty, and when I felt around, I didn't find any signs of blood. Johnny might be a prisoner, or he might have made it back to the main army, but at least he wasn't dead, and that would please Sarah and her mother and sisters. That got me thinking about Sarah, wishing I had a picture of her, and it was then that I noticed a strange shape down the line. What I found was like a vicious punch to the stomach. Thinking about it even now makes me feel sick. Willie Dodd, who was the last holder of Lucky Minnie, was sprawled on the ground, arms flung out, his right leg bent up at an awkward angle under his body. And on his chest was Spirit, dead, run through with a bayonet by one of the Reb looters I'd heard prowling about earlier. I wanted to do something for Willie and Spirit. Take care of them somehow. Maybe bury them proper, or say some prayers. Maybe go look for those Rebs and... But I suddenly felt weak and lightheaded, and my legs seemed as if they might buckle under me. Besides, a cavalry unit was thundering along the path in my direction. I climbed over our breastworks and wandered toward the dark woods, past where A&C companies had made their fight, past where the Rebs had had their advance pickets. There was dead soldiers to step over in these woods. Some I could see was ours, some theirs. I made a frightful amount of noise for someone trying to sneak away, but the cries of the wounded and that mule covered my clumsiness. I stopped to rest when the wood suddenly got thicker, and turned to look back over the battlefield, and I found it swallowed up by the black of night, still and sad. I couldn't see anything, not really, but it was all there in my head anyway. Was it Lieutenant Tom's had said after Captain Clapp had visited him that day last November, that this would be our deliverance? My legs felt heavy, and then I tripped and fell, and it took a time before I could push myself up. When I looked, I saw that I had tripped over a severed leg. And a voice started in, not Uncle's this time, but mine. It was another Bible line, one that I'd liked the sound of and wrote often, trying to picture the brave soldiers doing their noble work. I'm not sure how much I like those words now, but they seem to fit what happened. Horsemen charging, flashing sword and glittering spear, hosts of slain, heaps of corpses, dead bodies without end. They stumble over the bodies. I was half a mile out and already feeling lost when I remembered seeing Spirit's body laying across Willie, and I thought, they didn't have to kill that little dog. He didn't do anything to them but bark. He didn't have to die. And my eyes clouded up some as I left my friend and his dog and all the others behind and limped deeper into the old wilderness. Later. I had just finished the last entry when a bunch of Rebs rode up and dismounted on the hill behind me. I thought they had sniffed me out, but then they commenced to jabbering away and laughing about how the Federals had run. Can't be talking about our company. No one ran that I saw, not even Theron Chrysler. They didn't seem to be nosing around for strays like me, so I relaxed some, till I smelled the coffee. My stomach began growling then, and reminding me it hadn't been fed in who knows. Pulled leaves from the brush covering my little space and stuffed them in my mouth. Bitter, but got the juices going and the growling simmering down. Closed my eyes and chewed, thinking about poor Willie and Spirit and Sergeant Donahue, who must be dead too, and Johnny and the others. I even thought about Shelpt and hoped he'd gotten away. I wanted to read Sarah's letters, but I didn't dare take them from my pocket because of the noise they would make. So instead I thought about Sarah, and wondered if she was thinking about me. That's what I did till the Rebs finished their coffee. Probably coffee they got from us. And packed up and rode away. Must leave. This section is as busy as the plank road. Night. Dark. So dark can't see what I write, but I am wide awake and will write anyway. Left last home when sun went down. Moved deeper into Reb country. Clouds covered the moon and stars, so I walked where the walking seemed easiest. Went on, became confused, went on some more. Stepped into a stream, stopped to drink. Continued journey, slipping several times and getting caught in a sticker brush that scratched my hands, neck, and face. Headache not as bad, but it is still with me, and wrist and leg are sore. Now at edge of field, and we'll bed here, with biting bugs as company. Peaceful except for insect noise and some animal calls in the dark and my thoughts. Where is everyone I know? How are the lieutenant and Caesar? Who else was hurt or killed? How is William Kittler? I did not recall seeing him at all during the fight, but he must have been there. What is Sarah doing now? Sleeping peacefully, most likely, with no idea at all of what has happened to us. May 8th? Question? Woke to the sound of men working in the field. I counted 4 Negroes and thought to approach them. Caesar said they was all kindly disposed to the Federal soldiers and would be truthful about roads and trails. But then I saw a white girl riding toward them, cradling a musket, and I changed plans. They was far off, so I moved along the edge of the field unseen. But to where? Tried to orient myself according to the sun, and thought about battle map and Caesar's finger moving across it. Head is still foggy, and map remains unclear. But Caesar did say over here we would find poor soil, poor farms, poor and mean white folk. Stomach gave a shout about then, but all I could feed it was thoughts about my last real meal. A bit of hardtack would be a welcome feast just now, but gnawing on a stick is all I can do. Good thing there are so many streams in here, or I would no hope of escaping. Can barely read last night's scribble. Wonder if the lieutenant would change his mind about me keeping the journal if he ever saw that. Later. Walked a little and find myself very nervous every time I come to a path or trail. Have heard patrols roaming the woods, thankfully far off. One time I came very close to 2 men arguing over who had eaten the most chicken, and assumed they was a Reb patrol. No one else argues so loudly about food as soldiers do. My head spins from hunger while my stomach agrees with growls. Kicked over a rotten log and saw it swarm with crawling creatures. A fine meal for some. Thought about it for myself, but then I gag, so I guess I am not that hungry. Not yet, anyway. Skirted 2 fields after the first, both empty. Then I smelled food, close by and inviting. A stew with beef and potatoes, my nose told me. And when my stomach learned that, it set to churning and complaining. So I went toward the smell just to see. What I found was a small cabin surrounded by a neat little garden that was just beginning to turn green. Smoke from the cook fire was pouring from the stone chimney and bringing me that delicious smell. I was standing there breathing in dinner when the door opened and a white woman came out. I ducked when I saw her, not knowing what to expect, and she went right to her garden, where she cut some greens and then went back inside. There is food in there, I told myself, and a bed. These thoughts made my legs tremble. I was only 200 feet away, so close I could imagine the food, feel the soft mattress. Surely she would not refuse me. Besides, there did not seem to be a man around. With so many gone to fight, this is a land without a lot of grown men, so I could always take what I wanted, even without a weapon. Very tempting. But then a voice in my head, yes, another voice not my own, said, "Think it through first." It might have been the little professor who said this to me long ago. Who can remember? Anyway, the voice added, you don't want to act too quickly, especially when there are people around who want to do you harm. And she might be one. Probably is one. So I started wandering away, still taking in the smell, when there was a familiar loud report of a musket behind me, and a second later a ball sailed over my head and took a bite from the side of a tree. I didn't hesitate but started to run. Only my sleeve got snagged on a branch and I couldn't get it free at first. I tugged hard, snapped off the branch and tore my uniform and started to run, though I am not sure most folks would see it as running, I was so clumsy and tired. It was the white woman who shot at me, and it was her who commenced shouting, cussing me to get off her land, calling me all kinds of terrible names and hollering that she'd seen a Yankee and so forth. But I didn't mind her yelling. As long as she was yelling, she wasn't reloading. When I was out of her sight, I stopped to catch my breath, leaning heavily against a tree. Then I heard a second shot fired, followed a little time later by another. Signal shots to alert her neighbors about trouble, I guessed. I pushed myself away from the tree and headed down a rocky hill. When I reached the bottom, I heard another alarm gun to my right answer the woman's, soon followed by another from over here, and then another from over there, and another and another. A number of dogs started in barking too, all around me it seemed. I have heard musket fire many times since becoming a soldier, but I must say I never felt as small and as helpless as I did just then. Hurried on, listening and looking, and nervous every step. It is now late in the day, and I am near a small clearing with 2 log shacks in it. Tobacco drying shacks, I think, because they are so tall, with some smoke seeping from the cracks near the roof of one. A while back, the door opened, and an ancient Negro woman came out to gather up dead sticks. She's in there now, alone, I think, and I am here writing this, waiting for darkness and asking myself silly questions. Will she be kindly disposed toward me, or will she turn me in? Will she have any food to spare? They are silly questions, because I know I can't delay. I need food, and I need rest, and I need them now. I hope this will not be my last entry in this journal.